Usually when we think about keeping the lights on in our cities, we picture something like a giant faucet.
Yeah.
Like you need more power because everyone just turned on their air conditioning, so someone at a coal or gas plant just, opens the valve.
Right, they just burn more fuel, the turbines spin faster, and the energy flows.
Exactly. It's entirely predictable.
Yeah, it's a controlled system. You are basically dictating the supply to perfectly match the demand second by second.
But then you look at a grid running entirely on wind and solar, and suddenly that control valve is just gone.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell the sun to shine brighter. We're looking at a system that is honestly like a country-sized game of Tetris. The pieces are falling from the sky at completely unpredictable speeds, changing shapes based on cloud cover or wind currents.
And if you misplace a block in this version of Tetris, if you fail to catch a sudden spike in wind or a massive drop in sunlight, it's not just a game over screen. You are looking at a catastrophic blackout for millions of people.
Right. Or billions of dollars in generated power that just goes to waste because the grid couldn't handle it. It's exactly.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you were listening to this and wondering what your electric bill, your heating system, or even your next car purchase is going to look like in 10 years, well, you are in the right place.
You really are, because today we are tackling a massive global challenge. How do we actually transition to a 100% renewable energy grid without the whole system just crashing down around us?
To figure that out, we are diving into a 2022 paper from the journal Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews. It's by Fei Zhu and colleagues. Our mission today is to explore exactly how scientists plan the future of our power grids, specifically by looking at a groundbreaking new model that connects electricity, heating, industry, and transport all into one massive web. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So to understand why this specific model is such a big deal, we first need to look at why predicting a country's future energy grid is traditionally a mathematical nightmare. Like, how do energy planners even attempt this today? Well, historically, researchers have used incredibly sophisticated computational models, things with names like Plexos, Oselma-Seiss, Energy Plan, and Disposet. But to really understand the breakthrough in this paper, we have to explicitly identify the research gap the authors are addressing.
Yeah, okay, what was missing?
Basically, those older models had significant blind spots. So take a model like Disposet. It is fantastic at short-term hourly dispatch. It can tell a grid operator exactly how to route electricity hour by hour to keep costs low.
So it basically just operates the tools you already have in the toolbox.
It does, but, that is the limitation. It assumes you already know what power plants you've built. It cannot tell a government what size plants to build or where to invest billions of dollars for the long term. It just operates what is already there.
Right, I see.
Then on the flip side, you have models like Oselma-Seiss that are built for long-term capacity planning, stretching out decades into the future. But to run calculations for 30 years without melting a supercomputer, they take a dangerous shortcut. They use something called time slices.
Time slices. So instead of calculating every single hour of every day for 30 years, they are taking averages.
That is the core of the problem. I mean, a full year has 8,760 hours. Running mathematical optimization for every hour over 30 years is computationally massive.
Yeah, that sounds impossible.
Right, so these older models might break the whole year down into just 4 or 12 representative days. They generate a typical winter day and a typical summer day.
Oh, wow. Just a few days.
Yeah, and then they just multiply that out across the decades to save computing power.
Wait, calculating 30 years of infrastructure based on a typical day sounds incredibly risky. I mean, if we are relying on wind and solar, using time slices is like trying to pack for a 30-year road trip. But you only check the weather 4 days a year.
That is a great way to look at it.
Because wind and solar are highly variable, right? So if you don't calculate hour by hour, you miss the extremes. One freak week-long winter storm where the wind doesn't blow, and your entire 2050 projection is just ruined.
You hit on the exact reason this research was necessary. In the energy industry, they actually call that scenario the dark doldrums.
The dark doldrums sounds ominous.
It is extended periods with no sun and no wind. If a model uses time slices, it completely smooths over those sudden spikes and drops in power. As a result, planners completely miscalculate how much energy storage the country actually needs to survive those extremes.
That's a huge blind spot.
It gets worse. Furthermore, many of these older models completely fail to connect the power grid to other massive sectors. They modeled electricity in a vacuum, basically ignoring the fact that transportation and industrial manufacturing are also pulling massive amounts of energy.
So if you are listening to this, Imagine trying to plan your household budget, but you absolutely refuse to look at how much you spend on groceries or gas, and you only check your bank account 4 times a year. That is essentially how we were planning national energy grids.
Exactly. Which brings us to the paper's core contribution. Feijoo and his team realized the explicit missing link in the field was a completely open-source model capable of doing all three things at once.
Okay, all three being.
Long-term capacity investment, cross-sector integration, and continuous hourly resolution. No time slices. Every single hour for 30 years, tracking electricity, heating, transport, and industry simultaneously.
Wow, that sounds like a terrifying amount of math. I want to look under the hood of this thing.
Yeah.
What is the actual mechanism driving this model? Like, how does it decide what to build?
So the new tool is called the Enhanced H2RES model. Underneath it all, this model is a giant optimization engine driven by a massive objective function.
Okay.
And the objective function's sole purpose is to minimize the net present value of all future operational and capacity costs. It is literally searching the mathematical universe for the absolute cheapest way to keep a country running over 30 years.
But hold on, the cost of technology changes, right? If it is projecting out to 2050, doesn't know that a solar panel or a battery might be significantly cheaper in 20 years than it is today.
It mathematically accounts for that using technology learning curves.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it doesn't just use today's prices, it factors in projected cost reductions for emerging tech. It also calculates the minute operational costs of ramping power plants up and down, the fuel costs, and the rising price penalties for CO2 emissions.
That is incredibly detailed.
But the real structural genius of the enhanced H2RES model is its deep integration of power-to-X technologies.
Power to X. That sounds like something out of a comic book. I'm assuming the X is a placeholder for something we are converting electricity into.
The X is the absolute key to balancing a renewable grid. Power to X means taking excess electricity, like when a massive storm system brings high winds at 2 a.m. and nobody is awake to use the power.
Right, because normally you just throw that away.
Exactly. But instead of throwing it away, you turn it into a different form of energy, turning power into heat via massive district electric heat pumps, turning power into hydrogen via chemical electrolyzers, or turning power into stored energy inside millions of electric vehicle batteries plugged into the grid.
So it is really about utilizing stranded power. Instead of shutting off the wind turbines because the grid is full, we funnel that excess energy to heat homes or make hydrogen for factories. That is the cross-sector integration you mentioned earlier.
Yes, that is called sector coupling. And to make the transition realistic, especially in the industrial sector, the authors implemented something called a logit approach.
A logit approach. I'm assuming that means instead of a binary switch, it calculates actual friction.
Yeah.
Like a model seeing that coal just became 1 cent cheaper than natural gas and instantly deciding 100% of factories switch to coal. The real world doesn't work like that.
You are describing the exact flaw in basic economic models. They assume humans are perfectly rational robots.
Which we definitely aren't.
No, we aren't. The logit approach acts like a real messy human market. It assigns market shares to different fuels based on a choice probability function.
Interesting.
It weighs the raw mathematical price against the CO2 penalties, sure, but it also mathematically models human stickiness. It accounts for brand loyalty, existing long-term contracts, or just the simple reluctance of a factory owner to rip out $1 million boiler over a tiny price fluctuation. It basically turns human irrationality into a statistical probability.
Okay, if calculating 30 years of data, hour by hour, across every sector of an economy, using realistic, irrational market behaviors is so clearly superior to the old models, why hasn't everyone just done it this way from the start?
Well, the barrier has always been sheer computational cost. To chew through millions of decision variables without crashing, the researchers had to use serious optimization solvers.
Right, you need some heavy lifting.
Yeah, they used a program called GeoBaby, but more importantly, they employed advanced mathematical boundaries called barrier algorithms.
Okay, break down what a barrier algorithm actually does in this context.
Imagine you are in a maze with millions of branching paths. A standard algorithm might try to walk down every single dead end to see where it goes, which takes forever.
Right.
A barrier algorithm effectively builds invisible mathematical walls over the paths that lead to impossible or highly inefficient outcomes. It penalizes the computer for even getting close to the boundary of an impossible solution.
Oh, forcing the solver to stay within the feasible region of the math.
Exactly. This prevents the supercomputer from wasting time checking infinite impossible universes, allowing it to solve these massive multi-decade hour-by-hour equations in a somewhat reasonable time frame.
Okay, mathematically, this sounds incredibly robust. But a supercomputer's theory is kind of useless if it falls apart in the real world. Do they actually test this algorithm on a live grid to see what it would recommend?
They did. This is where we get into the major results. The authors took this superpowered model and pointed it at the real-life energy system of Croatia.
Croatia, okay.
Setting the baseline for Croatia is vital to understanding the results. In their starting year of 2019, Croatia consumed about 18,169 gigawatt hours of electricity. Interestingly, their peak energy usage actually happens in the summer due to heavy air conditioning demand.
And their grid is currently facing a massive transition anyway, right? They share a nuclear plant with Slovenia, and they have a mix of coal, oil, hydro, and wind. But the coal is scheduled to shut down by 2040, and the nuclear plant by 2043.
Right.
So they are looking at a massive void in their baseline power. They are forced to build something new regardless.
Which makes them the perfect test subject. So the researchers ran their first major test, giving the H2RES model a Renewable Portfolio Standard Constraint, or RPS.
Okay.
They told the algorithm, you must ensure the country has 90% renewable energy by 2050. Find the absolute cheapest way to build the infrastructure to do that. But they also introduced a CP limit.
CEP. That stands for Critical Excessive Energy Production. So CEP is basically a legally mandated limit on how much wind or solar you are allowed to just throw in the trash because you generated too much and the grid is full.
Precisely. They ran the scenario twice to see how the model would react. In one run, they allowed the system to waste up to 10% of its excess energy. In the second run, they forced it to be more efficient, only allowing it to waste 5%.
So what did the algorithm decide to build to save Croatia's grid?
Well, the entire system decarbonizes heavily and very quickly. Because of those technology learning curves we discussed, wind and solar simply become the cheapest mathematical options for power generation.
Makes sense.
For home heating, the model completely abandons fossil fuel boilers. It replaces them first with biomass boilers as a stepping stone, and then as we approach 2050, it surges entirely into electric heat pumps.
Electrify everything.
Exactly. But the real insight comes from how the model handles that CE limit. The difference between wasting 10% of your energy versus 5% completely changes the physical infrastructure of the country.
Let me guess. If you are only allowed to throw away 5% of the excess wind and solar, the model realizes it has to capture almost every drop of sunlight and gust of wind, even when nobody's home to use the electricity. It has to build massive storage.
It does. When forced to a 5% limit, the algorithm panics, mathematically speaking, and invests heavily in alkaline electrolyzers and massive hydrogen storage tanks.
I want to elevate the way we think about hydrogen storage here. People often call it a sponge, but it's really more like a financial trust fund for the grid.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. When you have a really windy spring day in Croatia and the country doesn't need that much electricity, you have surplus wealth. Instead of turning the turbines off and wasting it, the grid routes that electricity into electrolyzers. They use the power to split water, create hydrogen gas, and pump it into giant tanks.
Right.
You are locking away the surplus wealth today so the grid can withdraw it months later during a recession, like a windless, freezing week in December.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. It shifts energy across seasons, not just hours. By 2030, in the 5% waste scenario, the model builds nearly 140 megawatts of alkaline electrolyzers and over 485 megawatt hours of hydrogen storage.
Wow.
The math proves that to have an efficient, cheap, renewable grid, you absolutely must manufacture hydrogen to act as that long-term trust fund. But, that was just the first test.
Right, because the system did well just trying to hit a 90% renewable quota. What happens if we mandate carbon desks? Like, what happens if you tell the model it must eliminate greenhouse gases almost entirely?
This is where we analyze the deepest findings of the paper. For the second major test, the model keeps the renewable target, but it adds a strict, non-negotiable 90% CO2 reduction limit across all sectors by 2050.
Across all sectors. So that means not just cleaning up the power plants, but purging carbon from residential heating, industrial manufacturing, and transportation.
Yes.
And the algorithm is still trying to do this while minimizing costs for the entire country.
Yeah.
How does it react to the new constraints?
Decarbonization goes into absolute overdrive. Wind capacity investment jumps massively, reaching over 11,800 megawatts by 2050. The heating sector undergoes a violent mathematical shift. After 2030, the model totally abandons natural gas and biomass entirely.
Entirely.
Yes, it surges exclusively into electric heat pumps and electric boilers. District heating systems essentially become massive thermal batteries for the cities.
So it just electrifies everything it can get its hands on.
But I know from the data there was a massive surprise hiding in this second scenario, specifically regarding how people get around.
The transport sector provides the biggest twist of the entire study. To meet those incredibly strict CO2 limits while simultaneously trying to balance the erratic electricity grid, the model forces massive investments into fuel cell electric vehicles, or FCEVs.
Wait,
Yeah.
I had to push back on that. Why hydrogen cars? I mean, if you look at the market right now, battery electric vehicles, regular EVs, are dominating. Every major car manufacturer is building battery factories. Why does a supercomputer suddenly pivot and decide we need millions of hydrogen cars instead? Because of sector coupling. If we zoom out and look at the grid as one single machine, the system has thousands of wind turbines producing erratic spikes of power. It needs that trust fund we talked about.
Right.
It needs massive electrolyzers to soak up the excess power. By forcing the transport sector to transition to fuel cell electric vehicles, it creates a massive built-in daily demand for hydrogen fuel.
Oh, I see the logic. The constant demand for hydrogen fuel from millions of drivers justifies running the electrolyzers around the clock, which in turn acts as a balancing mechanism for the wind turbines.
Exactly. The cars literally solve the wind problem. The algorithm realizes that deploying hydrogen cars is actually cheaper for the country overall because it saves the electricity grid from having to build billions of dollars worth of massive grid-scale lithium batteries. The transport sector absorbs the volatility of the power sector.
That is incredible. The solution to a power grid problem is the type of car we drive.
And this is the profound takeaway from the researchers. If an energy planning model does not include the option for hydrogen cars or advanced electrolyzers, like those older siloed models we discussed at the start,
It misses the solution entirely.
yes, it might completely fail to find a viable path to 2050. It might look at the data and literally tell policymakers a zero-carbon grid is mathematically impossible.
But it isn't impossible. It just requires viewing the economy as interconnected tools that the old models couldn't see. You cannot solve the electricity problem without simultaneously solving the transport and heating problems. They are fundamentally the same equation now.
Sector coupling, like using hydrogen cars to balance the wind turbines, or using city heating systems as thermal batteries, is mathematically mandatory for a functional, affordable future grid.
So we have talked a lot about G-Roby solvers, logit approaches, objective functions, and gigawatt hours. Let's bring this down to earth. If you are listening to this right now, the reason your future heating bill, your next car purchase, and the stability of your local neighborhood grid matter is that energy planners and governments around the world are currently running these exact types of optimization models.
The infrastructure being funded in your city today is quite literally being decided by the math in models just like this one.
The math in Feiju's paper proves that everything in our future lives, from how we commute to work to how we heat our living rooms in the dead of winter, must be deeply, intricately interconnected to keep the lights on without bankrupting society. We are moving from a world of simple dials and predictable fossil fuels to a world of deeply integrated systems where your car battery and your home thermostat are actively keeping the national grid afloat.
And this raises an important question, something for everyone listening to mull over as we wrap up. The enhanced H2RES model proves that a zero-carbon grid is entirely mathematically possible and even economically optimal. But it requires perfectly deploying hydrogen storage, smart heat pumps, and electric vehicles in perfect, synchronized harmony.
The algorithm maps the perfect path.
But math assumes total rationality. It assumes that when the algorithm says, build hydrogen infrastructure today, the politicians agree, the funding appears without delay, and consumers happily change their habits to buy the fuel cell vehicles.
Right.
Are human beings, our political systems, and our deeply ingrained consumer habits actually ready to adapt as perfectly as the algorithm suggests? Does a mathematically perfect grid survive human unpredictability?
That is the ultimate hurdle. We can map out the perfect game of Tetris on a supercomputer, but we still need flawed, unpredictable humans to drop the blocks in the exact right place over the next 30 years. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, look for those hidden connections in your own life, and we will catch you next time.